Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's talk. We've still got a few people coming in, so I will not rush through the introduction, but we do want to start on time. I suspect Paddy might have quite a lot of questions at the end, so we don't want to start too late. Okay, I think most of you probably saw the talk he did for us in January about the Roman road that runs through the site at Priors Hall near Corby in Northamptonshire, but he's going to be expanding on that tonight, really, and talking more about the rest of the site. I don't want to steal his thunder, so quick bit of business first. Remember that this talk is being recorded, so if you can make sure that you keep your videos turned off. I'm just going to turn somebody's off now. There we go. And stay muted throughout the talk. Use the chat function to put any questions that you want to ask Paddy. I'll then pass them on to him at the end. And I think that's just about it. So over to you, Paddy.
Thank you very much. Everybody can hear me pretty well. I hope so. I just need to share my screen if I can remember how to do it. I'm assuming it's this button in the middle. Let's hope this is the one. Okay. I assume everybody can see that. So, from the beginning, here we go. Yes, right. So thank you very much for having me again this evening. Please, of course, if there's any questions, I think it's better if you just put them in a comment or something, and then I can get to them at the end. But if you remember my last talk, it's actually a real privilege to be back here again in the freezing cold weather. So I've been busy on site for the last few weeks, and it's been freezing cold. So this is actually quite a nice example, or rather a nice opportunity for me to speak about something else, to be honest, other than medieval field systems, which I've been doing for the last few weeks. So this one is a follow-up in a way, and to the talk I did about the Priors Hall Villa estate in its early throes. So this one is actually dealing with the late Roman period. And if I start from this, just in case anybody didn't see it before, where we are in the Roman world, if you like, in the province of Britain, is we are just, if I can just turn this on and hopefully everybody can see it, where Little Weldon Villa is just here. Priors Hall is just to the northeast of Little Weldon by about 2 kilometres. And the very first talk I did for you all was the Roman road that goes up this way and probably all the way to Casterton that way. And the people of this wonderful association has actually found out that it goes quite a long way. So it's quite an interesting thing. And that's the bit I talked about before. But interestingly, what I would really like to concentrate on this evening, there's a lot to get through, is you probably noticed all of these little blue dots. Now, we're in Northamptonshire, and Northamptonshire is what's known as a core villa region. But as I've explained before, there's over 2,500 Roman villas, maybe in Roman Britain, or known from Roman Britain, but they're all kind of described the same way. They range from small 3-cell rooms, things, very small cottage type villas, such as at Lockleys, and then you get enormous palatial structures, such as at Chedworth, but they're all named with the moniker of villa, and they're not very well understood. But you can see that they're all the way around here. This is a very core region. These little blue dots are all villas, and it is a very, very busy place. And that's mostly because of its natural resources, as we learned about in the first talk. But this evening, I kind of want to get on. In this evening, I actually want to talk to you about Area A, which is the best area, in my opinion. If I had to choose a single area, I think Area A would be my favorite. So we obviously, as you know from before, we developed these areas just here. This is where the Roman villa is situated at Priors Hall, Corby, part of a mixed-use housing development extension of around 5,500 homes. And the villa has been preserved in situ, and then based on the results of what we found, it was then subsequently scheduled. So you have now is a development of many hundreds of homes around this. So all of this is gone, as we did before. And we have developed this around this as housing. And then to the immediate west of the villa site was this one area. And this is actually conversely the latest area we found in terms of Romano British phase date, but it's actually the earliest thing we did back in 2019, which is goodness, it's 5 years ago. So we're going to be concentrating on this area just here. That's the villa and its buildings just there with the geophysics, and this is the results of what we found subsequently. This is the early Romano British villa estate, and this is obviously the subject of what we spoke about before. This is the road and the avenue, which was the driveway to the villa itself. It went all this way here, and of course to the immediate northeast of the villa, we found the late Iron Age settlement that we believe is some form of progenitor to the main villa itself. So the villa itself, generally speaking, dates from around 70 AD, and then it goes all the way to 150 AD before you start to see a cessation. It starts to dramatically go down. There's not a lot of occupation after that, and then in around 250 AD, activity starts again. So we'll start the big bit, to be honest. Now, I was told this would only take 6 weeks, and it took us 7 months to complete this excavation because the site is actually very, very small. It's only 1.3 hectares, but I just included this for you all now. This is where the main road was situated, just here. There's the avenue as it came this way all the way down, and this is where the villa buildings are located. And this is the subject of our site just here. So this is the excavation area. If I show you this with the plan, and basically what we found was from the 3rd century, the villa is immediately here to the left of your image. And what we found was essentially a late Roman builder's yard. Essentially, it is the infrastructure that we believe is associated with the renovation and then subsequent economic arm or enterprise for the late Roman villa estate. And you can see just here, I don't know if you can make out what that is. That's just on here. It looks like a very weird shaped kidney, which is just there. That is a stone quarry that was around 35 to 40 meters long by about 25 meters wide. It was an enormous thing. And inside that, they built a multitude of pottery kilns and all sorts of lovely stuff, which I'll come to and show you. So work began basically in August 2019. We descended. That's the Barclays Data Centre just behind you, just there. And this is all housing now. So this is just to answer a question that I no doubt I'm going to get. This is at the site of this now is now a lake, and it's bordered by some rather nice housing. But what we found is in late August, we stripped the site. If I go back, we stripped the site. Like I say, it's 1.3 hectares. That's a modern just there, but that's another road or track that goes this way from the Roman period. We stripped the site here, and on the very last day, which is always the way, on the very last day, the 360 excavator actually came across something that was quite interesting, and it was a wall. And you can see here, this is my team just as we started to clean it off and just have a look at these system of walls with our wonderfully clean 4x4s in the background, which were not to stay that way. What we ended up with was, as you can see, just here. So to the north, you've got a wall just there, and another wall here that goes north to south, just here, and another one as it returns just there. That one's heavily robbed, but you can just make out the ghostly impressions of it. And it was quite an exciting find. We actually initially, I believed that it was probably part of a barn or perhaps part of a 20th century something, because finding walls and things is actually very, very uncommon, especially in commercial archaeology, because, well, to tell the truth, they purposely avoid them because they're expensive to dig anything out. So usually we avoid these things, but the geophysics on this occasion had missed it. Which was a bit of a surprise, to be honest. And the subsequent, well, the earlier evaluation also missed it. So when we found this, it was actually quite exciting. So this is after we had initially troweled it off and cleaned out the area and got it ready to excavate. And that was in around early September. Well, 7 months later, and one of the wettest winters I think I can ever remember, it turned into this. Now, I hope that's playing okay. But you can see the walls that I just shown you, which are here, they're around the outside. This is a photogrammetry 3D model of the site when we'd finished. And what you're looking at is essentially a manufacturing center. So you can see here, just as the camera goes in, you can see there's a large tile manufacturing kiln just here, and another one here. And also associated pottery kilns and bits and pieces. And I'm sure that the first thing that strikes you is just how well preserved it was. It definitely isn't a barn. I think we can say that with some certainty now. But it definitely wasn't a barn, and it turned into something, in fact, quite exciting indeed. So if I show you here, when I've actually shown, or rather highlighted the main parts of this. So on the outside, we had some post holes that was for a lean-to or a shack, which was to the west side of the kiln, which is this side. And it covered an area of around 14 to 16 meters. That's 16 meters east to west, and then about 14 to 16 meters again on that way. So what was really interesting about this is that we had not just one tile kiln, we had another tile kiln, and then they thought that that hadn't been enough, so they built another tile kiln, and they thought, well, maybe that wasn't enough either, so they put in a pottery kiln, and then they thought, well, maybe we could squeeze in one more, so they put in another pottery kiln. And this is on, it's quite a sizable thing when you're stood on it, but as you can see here, it's all very contained, and we know that they were using them all pretty much the same time, or simultaneously is probably more likely. But if I show you this, which is an image looking at the manufacturing site, you can see the main tile kiln just here, and what we called the little tile kiln, and that little tile kiln just there, the smallest one. But the main tile kiln itself was about 3.5 by 4 meters. It was a whopper. And then with the second one as well, that was around 3 meters by 2 meters, and they're more of a standard kind of size with these kind of domestic style kilns that we tend to find. But if I can show you, in fact, if you imagine you can see that in front of you, now what I want you to do is look at it with the artist impression, the reconstruction that we've recently had done. And you can see, if I go back again, there's the little tile kiln, the big tile kiln, and I've even tried to make sure that we get people in their perspective. So that's looking at it in exactly the same way. There's the main entrance just here. There are some issues, as I'm sure some of you have noticed, with the reconstruction, such as they're dressed like they're working in Tuscany and not 4th century Northamptonshire. And another couple of things are, well, what's really interesting about this is I wanted to include the rubbish and the detritus. Occasionally, I've noticed with reconstructions, and I'm sure many people have, is how clean they are, how sanitized they are. This was essentially a building site. It was a manufacturing site. It would have been chaos, absolute chaos. It would have been dirty and messy and very rarely clean. And they would have been working in pretty torrid conditions. But we'll get on to basically how the tile kiln went a little bit on, because I've only got an hour. And as some of you may know, I can talk for an inordinate amount of time, and there's a lot I need to get through. So I'm really pleased with that reconstruction, and I hope that you are all excited about it as well. So this gives you an idea of preservation of the site. Now, if any of you have ever worked on an archaeological site and you've been thrilled to maybe find a coin or a piece of pottery or something else, this preservation was utterly staggering, and we had no idea any of it was there. So you can see Yerai here, that's in, just want to maintain, that's the smaller of the kilns. This is Catherine digging into one of the sides of it where the pottery kiln was. You can see it's very deep, it's very disgusting. All of this wonderful blackness, which is extraordinary. I'm not afraid to admit that it's extremely lovely, because it's all rubbish and backfilled rubbish that they just threw away when they'd finished. And this gives you an idea of scale and size. This is my entire site team and the curator as well, all posing in the tilery when we'd finished. So it gives, and everything you see before you is Roman. It dates from around 250 to 350 AD. So one of the biggest and most exciting parts of this, as I'm sure many of you may have noticed, it doesn't look like a conventional tile manufacturing site. Now, tile kilns can be made out of stone, but it is very, very rare. Most tile kilns, if I go back, most tile kilns that I've ever seen, apart from the really big ones, where they mostly like batteries of them by mostly the army, but also civilian contractors as well. Most of them look like this, what you see Yerai in there. It's kind of a small domestic facility, whereas the Prize Hall tileries is extraordinarily large, and it is very, very big. And it was also incredibly idiosyncratic. If they designed and built the tilery like this, then they made some dreadful mistakes, and they clearly knew what they were doing. and they made some mistakes in their design that just didn't really go well for them. So what we'd noticed from the beginning was where it was. So we're just looking, there's the villa buildings there to the west, and this is a contour map, as you can see. And you can see that this building is on a ridge, and it is quite a dramatic ridge as well. You would stand on the villa site, for example, and look directly west, and this is within 200 meters, and that is a dramatic ridge above you. And it seems kind of unlikely that they would put a sensorially unappealing thing on a hill overlooking their villa site on purpose. And already it was quite high up, and that becomes part of something. It was a very strange thing. And then we get to the designs of the walls of the complex itself. So the walls going around it, which I'll show you. So you can just see these. Do excuse the mess. Archaeology is a messy business. These are the walls for the precincts which goes around it. There's no reason for them to be there whatsoever. You can see they're classic Roman design as well, and classically Roman built. They are built incredibly well, and they also match the first phase, which is one of these, of the Roman villa site immediately next door. This is taken from one of the evaluation trenches, and that is one of their walls as well. So you can see there is a distinctive correlation in building techniques, and that is securely dated till the 1st century AD. But it's very, very strange because it seems incredibly analogous. It doesn't work. So if I show you it like this, it starts to become a little bit more clear. For example, this here is the wall you were just seeing. And as it comes down here, and it comes down here, and then you get a building enclosed in the middle. Now, if I highlight these just here. Now, this is obviously very cursory. We've done an inordinate amount of work on this. So this is just to illustrate immediately. I mean, I know that most people sat watching right now are very impressed with my Microsoft Paint skills. Now, you see the building. What this looks like is in plan, it looks remarkably like what we would normally call a Romano-Celtic temple, which are a precinct, or ambulatory as they're usually called, although this is slightly wide, so we're going to call it a precinct. This is a precinct going just around here. And in the central part of it is this other small building called the Keller, generally, so CELLA. This is called a Keller, like generally speaking, in the archaeological vernacular, that's what they're called. And then on the outside were these system of posts. And they were all very, very strange things. Now, obviously, this is a modern track just here. So it was all a bit strange. And at first, we didn't really know what we were looking at. We just knew that it was one of the strangest tile kilns made. It's incredibly complex and incredibly strange. But if I show you, for example, what I mean by Romano-Celtic temple, and they're often associated with Roman villas as well. In fact, many of them actually are. A Romano-Celtic temple, or rather, in this occasion, it's probably a tomb or a mausoleum, which I'll get to in just a moment. But you can see on the right here are several schematics, if you like, or plans of known Romano-Celtic temples. And you can see that they're incredibly reminiscent, specifically this one at Lullingstone, which is just behind Lullingstone Villa. And you can see it's incredibly similar. If I go back, you can see that it's a very similar shape in plan. So this is just here. So at first we thought, hang on, so if they've turned a temple or a mausoleum into a tile kiln, then that's ridiculous, which is the very first thing. And I'm sure many of you are sitting there thinking, yeah, but really though, we'll get to that. Would they really do that to a structure? And absolutely, yes, of course they would. These are human beings, and most of the time, money is king. And that's the thing. They are human beings, and they are not these incredibly like A to B people that just worship the gods all the time and are worried and incredibly superstitious. They're human, and what we saw in archaeology every single day on fieldwork all the time is that they are just people, and people do things like this. Now, at first, it was very difficult to find a parallel to this. We can't possibly find one. You can see the original walls of the Keller just here. They've been dramatically remodeled, but on the inside, they retain a lot of their original character. And there's the precinct walls just here. And for some time, we couldn't really find a parallel, or rather, couldn't really find a parallel to it. So it was a very difficult thing, but we know it's the only one in Roman Britain, at least. However, it's not the only one example of this happening known. For example, you can see that that is dramatically similar. This is from Schanze in Switzerland, and this was actually sent to me by a Swiss archaeologist that read about the prize hall site, and she was incredibly excited, and she sent me this and said, "This looks incredibly like your site." I said, "Goodness me." In fact, I won't exactly say what I actually said, but it was along the lines of, "My God, that's brilliant." So you can see here, they've got the central Keller just here. Obviously, this is the Romano Gaulish temple, so it's slightly different. However, you can see it's originally here, okay? And with the second ancillary tile kiln flanking it, the main entrance just up here, which is exactly what we see at Prior's Hall. And also the phase dates are the same. So from one of the posts that I showed you earlier, so really interestingly, our next problem was dating. Now, dating was a big problem because the level of work that had gone into this afterwards to renovate this thing had rendered most of the dateable objects moot point, disappeared, for example. Underneath the actual courtyard floor, we found the remains of a first century brooch, which is quite interesting. Like, we got a white metal brooch, a first century type, and that was kind of exciting. However, into the post-ex of this, I'll just go back, and into the post-ex of this, our pottery specialist actually excitedly got in touch and said, "Listen, I think I've found the pottery. I think I've found the dates." So within these posts here, they had used, now the picture is skewing the posts. They are actually straight. I don't know what's happened. I think it's the drone lens has gone, because it's the same here. I had to rectify these. So from some of these posts just here, used as packing in the original material, the original post was pottery. And that pottery was incredibly unabraded, which means it hadn't been traveled very far. And it dated to around 60 to 150 AD, which is the only early pottery found on all of Area A. And if you remember from my first talk dealing with the early Roman villa estate, you will know that that dates from around 70 to 150. So this is kind of the smoking gun we needed to give us this impression of, well, we've got dating for this thing. And it definitely doesn't date the tilery, because we know by carbon-14 dates and a multiple of other sources that it dates to the 3rd and 4th centuries. So we're back to Switzerland and Schanze. And what's really interesting about this is the dates are eerily similar. Now, of course, I'm not going to say out loud that there is some form of maybe itinerant connection between craftspeople, because that would be ridiculous. But I don't think any more or less ridiculous than saying that we've got a tomb converted into a tile kiln. However, what's really interesting about this is that this 1st century AD temple dated from the middle of the 1st century, and it went out of use in the early 2nd century. And then when it went out of use in the early 2nd century, around 100 years went by, and then a different community turned up and thought, this is a really good shape. We can make the tile kiln out of this. And that's exactly what they did in around 250 to 280 AD, exactly the same as at Prior's Hall. But it's not the only place this happens. We found more in Gaul as well. These are slightly later, so these are from the 5th and 6th centuries into the early medieval period in France, but they're doing exactly the same thing. And you can see that the arrangement of kilns is exactly the same. So this is the main tile kiln within the Keller itself, and then just outside the main ambulatory wall is a smaller tile kiln. And then we go to one of the walls on the inside. So you're looking at it on this side, on here. So these were all lined with clay. When we originally excavated these, they were all lined with clay. And this picture actually gives you quite a lot of detail about the original people that were dealing with this. So you see, the original stonemasons. They are beautifully made. They're very, very well made pieces of stone. They're not rough hewn at all. They're well shaped, they're well made, and they're well put together. And you can see that the tilery, or the tilers themselves, these are supports for the cross flue housings, the ones that come across the kiln. And you can see that they're just random bit of stones that they've just put together. Essentially, it's the that'll do phenomenon that you see in archaeology, that we see in the modern world today, where people do something and go, well, yeah, that'll do, that'll be fine. But what you can see here, these were all lined with clay to form a hermetic seal for the inside of the kiln. Okay, but what we had were these little notches within the walls, And they were both sides. So they went across this wall and they went across this wall. And the tilers had gone through great pains to fill these in with clay. They'd gone, and in fact, they'd lined this entire wall with solid clay to make a hermetic seal. And we don't know what they're for. I've got no idea exactly what they're for. They could be for some kind of suspended floors were smaller, or believed to have been smaller on average in the past, but I don't think they were 20 centimeters tall. So they couldn't have got underneath the floor. It could be to provide, because there's the original floor level just under here. And we know that that was opus signinum because opus signinum was found all over the interior of this structure, but nowhere else on the site at all. So we believe that the floor was of opus signinum, which is a compendium of crushed clay and sand and a bit of clay and some stone. It's basically, literally, opus signinum means a little bit all mixed together, essentially. So interestingly enough, these little notches, they could be for that. And what it could be, because if it is a place of remembrance for the dead, i.e. a mausoleum where you would put remains of your family members in, which were a huge phenomenon in the early Roman period, especially on the continent, but they're not very well known in Britain, not as well known as probably they should be. But perhaps they are to put a no finer point on it, to air the structure out, to keep an airflow around the structure. Or indeed, they could be for shelves. They could be the bottom or for shelving, like you see on castles, for example, today for floor. They could be for shelving for cubicles, perhaps, maybe for ossuary cubicles or something like that. It could be something like this. But what I really want to show you, and what I think is what makes Prior's Hall so special, because all of this is dealing in the abstract. And what we try and do as field archaeologists is search through the abstract and actually see the actual human beings that inhabited these landscapes and these places. And this incredible looking wall is actually not probably the least nice one of it, but we know that was probably, that was almost certainly made by stonemasons. And you can see it's well made and everything else. Well, I am going to show you the tilers version of this, because the tilers had to do a rebuild on one side of it to create the main entrance to the kiln. So this is first and early 2nd century wall. This is the tilers' idea of the same thing. Now you can see, I'm sorry, every time I see this, I've seen this hundreds of times, and every time I see this, it makes me laugh. And I love these people so much. I really do. When we think of the Romans, we tend to think of architectural superiority or architectural like superpower, if you like. We tend to think of the Colosseum or aqueducts or something else. Most of the time, vernacular architecture, especially in the northwestern provinces, would have been as crap as this. It would have, apart from outside of the main urban centres, such as big temples or anything else, or maybe the Forum or Basilica, which the Romano British didn't really engage with much anyway, or outside of villas, this is largely what the stuff would have looked like, if not made of wood. So you can see that they've mortared it to within an inch of its life, but they've reused stone from the original Keller walls and tile. They've used a composite of tile and stone in a that'll do configuration. I think that's the technical term for it. But I just want to draw your attention to this bit here, which is the construction cut. That is the second construction cut. The first construction cut for the original wall is here. And the second construction cut is just there. So that is how they built basically one of these stoke pits, because they had to lower the wall. So they built that in, they cut it in, and then they built this wall inside. But my favorite thing, in fact, one of my favorite things ever found in British archaeology is this. It's the entrance to one of the kilns. And you can clearly tell that it was constructed by somebody ambitious, but ever so slightly rubbish. This is exactly how we found it, and this is exactly how it was used. They'd perched it ever so carefully on top of these stones. And even this, which we thought was excitedly like an Iron Age loom weight, which is what it looks like. But sadly, it's just a bit of tile with a thumbprint in it, which is exciting on its own. But they've wedged that in, and that is the entrance to the kiln itself. And you can see at some point in antiquity, it collapsed. And it definitely collapsed. You can see that it collapsed. But we found underneath it that there were primary deposits of rake out underneath. So not only did it collapse, but they couldn't be bothered to fix it, and they carried on using it. And I think that is a wonderful intro into these people, the curious people of Priors Hall at the moment. And what's interesting about these is these are the normal craftspeople. So what we're seeing on this specific building is we are seeing the tilers figuring it out as they go. So they probably knew what they were doing, as in a guild kind of thing. They knew as a craft, they knew what they were doing, but they were dealing with a space that they weren't well acquainted with. They were probably used to building their own kilns, as in cutting them into the ground, lining them with clay or with tile, and then firing them in situ, perhaps, to build the structure. But it seems like, or rather the evidence seems to suggest, is there was a guild of tilers, and this is where they were told they had to build their kiln. And you can see them doing the best they possibly can with this. So that's the entrance to the main kiln itself. You can see these cross flues as they come over the top. And this is some of the clay lining that I mentioned to you earlier on. You can see again how they've just keep relining of vents. This red here is where the heat of the kiln has permeated against the wall, but this green stuff just here is stuff where they haven't. Now, in some places, I'm afraid I can't quite get it on here, but in some places they'd actually baked the fire, or rather the heat from the kiln had baked the finger impressions onto the clay itself from the tilers as they were doing it. So you could even see the back end of your fist, if you make a fist and bang the side of it onto something. That's what they were doing. So it's quite an interesting thing. And again, we're looking at the general dynamism of the time, in so much as this was an old pili housing. So it shows there's two phases to the kiln. There's an old pili housing that collapsed, and they just covered it over. Rather than clear it out and start again, they just covered it over so the kiln could be used again. That's just a white screen for some reason, but I hope you're impressed by it. And this gives you a general impression, I think, about what the tiles, because this is a modern tile manufacturing center from Southeast Asia, and they're incredibly similar. There's going to be very, very little difference. And you can see the general amount of rubbish and detritus, and there's the man even there stamping on the clay, preparing the clay and getting it working. And you see they're storing up bits of tile here. There's random bits of rubbish here and there. And I think it just gives a real nice evocation of the kiln itself. And just to show you again, I think just to reiterate this, I think it's actually really interesting. I know Catherine here, the archaeologist, doesn't look excited, but I promise you she's absolutely ecstatic. It's just we needed to remind her to tell her face that. So what's really interesting about this is what the back end of the small squared kiln on here. And they're raking their stuff into this because there's a pottery kiln just there. And you can see they're fabulously well made. Any of you have seen pottery kilns before? They are generally following a type. They are either lined with tile or with clay. They're cut into the ground, whereas this is enormous. That's not even the entrance to the pottery kiln itself. And so they were basically fitting in as much as they possibly could. And you can even see the original surface of the courtyard just here. This is just outside the tile kiln. You see the original court, and you see how they cut through it. And we even found on one side, just here, there's the ramp for them to get in and out as well. So, because I want to make sure that we cover as much as we possibly can, I haven't been able to cover exactly where the door was, for example, because that's a frequently asked question. The door was to the west, where in fact, the original door to the mausoleum was just here. And that's why they made, because you very rarely see square pottery kilns. But of course you do on Priors Hall. We see it because they built it up against the original wall in order to close off that original part of the building. So production. Now, this is my wonderful colleague. This is Ted Levermore. He's our CBM specialist, and he came on site and he was studying the brick and tilers basically as we came out. We removed over about 10 tons of this material. Now, this is all Roman brick and tile, all of this. This is all stuff that went wrong. This is all the waste product. And this is some of their product that they had. And because we're incredibly professional, we had an old pasting table, and that's how we did it. He sat on a pasting table and he looked at tile by tile as we were digging it out. So I'm taking this from inside it. Now, production of tile is something that's rather drastically overlooked in Romano British studies. We know it's a vital part now. Now, Roman tile making, or rather tile making as a principle, as a concept, was introduced to Britain by the Romans, and within a generation or so, it became a huge industry, and it's populated most of the time with smaller tile kilns. In the early period, they're small tile kilns that were basically formed by the military, but they're small tile kilns that then like supply small towns or forts or early villas, embryonic villas and things like this. And then as you go later into the Roman period, what you get is a smaller number of much larger tile manufacturing sites. And that's what Prior's Hall is. Now, the question is what is it they're making and where's it going? Because they were making an awful lot of it. Now, the tile production, as I said, is largely I don't know, it's largely neglected in Romano British studies because we find so much of it. There are inordinate amount of excavations where we'll find lots and lots and lots of tile. And we'll say, well, there must be a building nearby. If anyone's ever seen Time Team, they always do that. They will say, well, there must be a building nearby. But the one thing we're missing when it comes to tile is the 3D of a tile, as in on a structure itself. We don't really know, for example, the one thing we can't see is how they looked. Now, this is a rather wonderful image. This is during the excavation of Herculaneum in Italy. And you can see, again, the pumice and everything else that covers it. This is from the 1930s. And this is actual Roman roofs in situ. So it gives you a really good idea of what the whole point of doing all of this for. And what we had, we were incredibly fortuitous in that this is the tile kiln entrance here. So you can see the massive amount of work we did. And this is a batch of tiles that they produced, along with some big old bits of early work stone. But it's batches of tile that they produced that they never needed. So what they did was they pushed it all into the stoke pit and buried it. And just underneath it, we found the remains of an entire cow. That would seem like it was some form of structured deposit, which means perhaps it was some form of offering, because it would seem very strange that a cow was hanging around next to a tile kiln, and it was stratigraphically directly underneath this. So we were incredibly lucky to find. This is just one of their last batches that they made at Prior's Hall. But if I give you some context of just how much we found, this is Ted again lying on just the waste material from the last phase of its life. So this is around 11.3 tons of brick and tile that we removed by hand from the tilery itself and from its immediate environment. And we couldn't find a scale big enough, so we asked somebody to lay on top of it. And I think that's really interesting. Like I said, if you find a bit of tile on a field walk or something else, it's quite exciting. And even yes, we found in lots of it and it's quite exciting, but I promise after you find 11 tons of it, it becomes distinctively less exciting. So production, so based on, we assessed when we originally came off site, well, we're still going through, in fact, the amount we brought back, something in the region of 2 tons back to our office for future analysis. Now, 2 tons of brick in 4x4s, that was quite a lot of journeys to get it back to our office at Bar Hill near Cambridge. So we took 2 tons back, but we left around 9 tons there after we looked at it on site. So based on 2.7 tons of material that on site that he looked at, he's estimated that between 10 to 15,000 tiles were produced per season at Prior's Hall. That's per season. Now, a single tiler could do maybe 200 a day. So this is probably over a single season, maybe in summer, and I'll get to the evidence for that in just a moment. And they were making Versalis, Pedalis, and Lydian brick types, and these are just fancy terms, really, for different sizes of bricks they were making. For the easiest one to actually see is the Pedalis. We use it today. It's P-Days. It's a Roman foot, basically. And it's where we obviously get the word P-Days from, like podiatry, if you go and see somebody for your feet. But they're dominated by tegula, which were roof tiles. And we identified hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of finger signatures on tiles. Finger signatures most of the time are swirls. They're where a tiler has got his or her first finger and they've just swirled around the tile to show who did it or perhaps how many they'd made. We've had hundreds of those. And now we've still got 1.5 tons to go. Now, that's just to say that we came off site in 2020 and the analysis is still ongoing of all of the brick and tile we found at Priors Hall. So what we also have is evidence of its manufacture itself, of the dynamic process that goes into this. So what I've included left on the top left here is a schematic of basically how this works. The clay is dug and then it is allowed to weather. So it's basically left in pools or something, or a little pit or something outside it. And then it's prepared, as in it's kind of, sometimes it has to be cleaned, sometimes it has to be puddling on, it has to be stepped on, it has to be prepared to be made into tiles, maybe removing some of the impurities, which we have evidence for all around the site, and I will get to that. And I do appreciate as well, I need to say, I do appreciate that I'm going incredibly quickly through this, but I'm trying to distill 6 months of very, very exciting excavation into an hour on a freezing cold November evening when I'm incredibly tired. So I'm trying, so do please bear with me. I'm trying to get through everything like that's important, I think. So what's interesting about this is that the tiles are made, and then some tiles are stamped or marked, like you saw. Sometimes you get stamps when they're like proper official workshops, but on Priors Hall, they're mostly finger signatures. And then they're left to harden, which is where we come to this bit. So this is from an experiment that was conducted in Catalonia in Spain in 2017, where some incredible Spanish archaeologists rebuilt a tile kiln and tried to experiment how long it would take, how much fuel it would take, and the kind of skills you would need to fire 200 tiles. And they failed quite a few times because the tiles would bloat and they would pop and they just wouldn't come out right. So it took them a long time, 2 weeks, I think, to make 200 tiles. Now, a Roman tiler, they were much, much quicker, but they also made terrible mistakes, which again, I'll show you. But what I would like to just prove here is we found a lot of footprints, and I say, and then a lot of footprints. And that's not to say that they're running up and down the tiles. So you can see that these are little marks made by the nails underneath their shoes, or their caligae, as the Romans would call them, which are sandals with well, they're kind of like football boots in a way. I think that's incredibly erroneous, but it gives you a good idea of it. And you can see one here, which is the end of a shoe. Now, what we mostly see is we never see a full shoe. You only see the very edge of it, and it's because the tilers would go along these tiles with their feet and press their foot into them, which is what you can see here. If their foot sinks into it, it's not hard enough. It's not ready for the kiln yet. We found hundreds of these. You can see this person they couldn't quite decide whether it was dry or not, so they basically river danced all over it. But this one is a nice, a really lovely impression. And what's interesting about this is comparative analysis suggests that that's a woman's shoe. So there are definitely women working on the tilery, which we take for granted anyway, because of course there are. But it's nice to find that proof. In fact, when we did, I might as well tell everybody, when we did the original press release for this, and we said about this wonderful thing and how lovely this is, the Daily Mail ran the headline of "The Romans Wore Fancy Shoes." So sometimes you kind of feel like you're on an uphill battle, to be honest. And from small things, really great things are revealed. This is a very tiny piece of tile. You can see this is in centimeters. It's only just over 8 centimeters wide. This was found from one of our environmental samples, and you can see that it has an imprint of a fern or a plant. And that proves, and by some very clever people, they were able to identify that as a certain type that grows in the early part of the year between spring and summer. And there is lots of epigraphic evidence from around the empire that tells us exactly the same thing, that they are, for the most part, they do all of this stuff, clay digging and everything else, in the winter months, which is not a surprise in Britain, of course, and they do all of the manufacturing in the summer months. And epigraphic evidence from around the empire suggests that was between May and September. And what we have is this wonderful little link of environmental evidence that suggests that they're doing exactly the same thing. So they are following some form of rota on this thing. They are actually following it, which suggests to me they've done it before. And another thing that we found was not just the footprints of humans, but animals. And we're getting a really nice, I don't know, a really nice picture of the natural environment at Prior's Hall. So here on the top is a cat print just there. And I'm sure we've all been through this, where we lay concrete or cement in our garden as a path or something, and you leave it overnight and you come out the next day and there's cat prints, dog prints. Cats just seem to aim for this. And the Romans were facing, the Romano British were facing this exact same problem again and again and again. And what's interesting about this is that they took no notice of the print and they fired it anyway. And if they fired it so high, it vitrified and it went into glass on the inside, which means it was still wet when they put it in. And this one here is a small dog, a very small dog, perhaps a puppy, standing on it. We found hundreds of these, but I think these are really nice and evocative, and people are generally very, very impressed with these things. In fact, it's one of our most popular things we talk about. And what's interesting about this one is this is a scene in time. This is a moment in time. This one, you can see there's a puppy, small dog just here. And the way that and this is chicken. So you've got a chicken here and a chicken just up there. And the way that this is, and we found a few of these, it suggests that the chicken is being chased by the puppy, or perhaps the other way around, because this chicken is running at some pace. You can see how they're skidding. And chickens only really run when they start, but they run, and this little small dog was perhaps chasing them. And of course, that is a slight romantic conceit, but I don't see why not. So we also, from the tiler itself, we had a wealth of evidence of their tools, of the tools of their trade, such as this wonderful needle case just down here, where they'd actually made, the original craftsperson had probably made a mistake in the decoration of it. And you can see that the decoration is actually not very even and not very good. So either they made a mistake, or it was somebody idly trying it out, or even learning, because we found that at the bottom of one of the stoke pits, where they may have been. I have this wonderful narrative in my head, and I don't know whether it's true or not, because they're all dead. How do I know? But I have this wonderful image of one of the tilers waiting for the tiles to fire, because they used to have to sit with it overnight and basically watch it. They used to have to sit with it overnight, and I imagine one of the tilers just sitting there, just trying this out, just idly trying this out. They didn't have mobile phones, and they weren't just going to sit there in the dark. So this is a really interesting thing. This is a reaping hook. Basically, it's a sickle. There's the handle of the tan there, where the wooden handle would have come through here. This is for collecting small bracken or small bits of wood for fuel for the kiln itself. And we've estimated that it needed something in the region of 2 tons of fuel just to get it going. It needed about 2 tons of wood just to get the kiln up to temperature. And then after that, depends on the tiles they needed to make, I think. This is found in one of the pottery kilns. This is an adapted pair of shears that they used to decorate pottery vessels. That's a blade there. They held this in their finger just here, and you can still hold that today, and that fits beautifully into your finger. And that's how they used to create the decoration on the side of the pottery vessels. This is one of their knives, which is very common. Everyone had one, I think, during this period, and for most of the subsequent periods up to the Industrial Revolution, I think. In fact, probably even beyond then. So this is one of their knives just here. And this is something I'm very, very pleased with. This is a stylus that was found within the tilery itself, which suggests that there is some element of bureaucracy going on. And this is one of our site teams, actually one of our favourite objects. This is a bracelet that was found in an area just outside the tilery where they were recycling metal. They were busy, they were doing all sorts of stuff. And we found a crucible that suggests that they might have been trying to make glass at Prior's Hall at the same time. But this is a bracelet, it's a copper alloy bracelet, basically bronze. And the alloy on it is actually really lovely. And it might have come from one of the villa occupants next door rather than one of the tilers or the workers, because it was found in this metal recycling area. And metal recycling is incredibly common in the late Roman period. In fact, probably all through the Roman period. In fact, recycling is a very, very underappreciated industry in Roman Britain itself. But you can see that it's been broken on one side, broken on the other. But the alloy on this is actually quite staggering. You've got a light alloy just here, and then a dark alloy, and then it alternates between light and dark as it goes all the way around. And that is intentional, and it's an effect. And what it's meant to do when this was new, what it's meant to do is reflects light. it basically reflects light, or it sparkles or shimmers, and it's probably specifically designed to work in firelight or low light conditions. So you get this wonderful idea of these people wearing these wonderful bits of jewelry, and this would have been almost an effect, you know, it would have been an effect on this. Okay, and so, but perhaps the greatest thing we found is something that's actually incredibly rare. It's incredibly rare to find, especially by commercial archaeologists for sure, outside of urban environments or military contexts. We found an inscription. They're not that rare on tile kilns, but we don't find many tile kilns. So by that virtue, they are rare. This is a tile, or across a pedalis. It's a big tile, a big floor tile. And one day, the tiler, they laid it out, they got it all ready, and the tiler with his finger, and you can even see the fingernail drags in here with his finger into the wet tile, he wrote Potenti. He ran out of space though, bless his heart, and then put Fecit. And we think, or rather, Roger Tomlin believes that it is Potentinus fake it, Fecit, which is has made me, or rather has made, because the one thing we're missing from this is the amount Potentinus made, because this is incredibly common when you do find these kind of inscriptions on tile kilns. What you would get is Potentinus has made X amount, how many he has made in that day or perhaps that week, and the date, commonly the date, and we are just missing that information. So that would have been really special. However, I like this very, very much because it's with their finger, it's not with a stick or anything else. And the second thing I think I like about the most is Potentinus might have been very, very literate, and he could, well, maybe just enough to write his name and write the amount of tiles, perhaps. It's about as far as his literacy went, probably, because Potentinus is a singular name, which suggests that they're of perhaps servile status. But I really like this because he might have been very proud of how many he made, but he was a dreadful tiler, because this tile had bloated and broken and cracked in the kiln. You can clearly see the 3D effects of the bloating, and these cracks aren't us either. We found it like that, and we were able to lift it in one piece. They are from the kiln itself, and they threw it away. But by that beautiful accident, by that beautiful irony, we were able to find it later on within the tile kiln itself. And I think this is another something really poignant, because so much literature and so much ink has been spilled about Roman villas, especially in Britain, whereas in fact they're very, very ill understood. We don't really know how they worked. We don't really know what they were for. We don't know who built them. We don't know who lived in them. We don't know how many families lived in them. We don't know whether they were seasonal or whether they were just homes, or whether they were probably multi-complex and multifaceted as well. But what's really special about Potentinus and his tile is that villa owner, they were the cream of the aristocracy, of the provincial aristocracy. And they would have spent the equivalent of millions and millions and millions of pounds to commemorate how big they were, to show how clever they were, to show their dominion over their landscape, over their local populations. And we have no idea who they are, but we do know the name of one single craftsperson that was working on this site. And I think that this is a delicious irony that only archaeology ever really gives you. So, where was it all going? Which is another question that we are trying to address with some speed. Actually, we're really getting through this now. So the main road comes from Drake Castleton all the way, well, probably even further, as I'm sure my illustrious colleagues will tell me soon. And then it goes past Laxton, which is a massive ironworking site, and then past Littlewell, and it goes basically all the way down here. So we think that they're bringing tile up and down these roads, but that is also incredibly impractical. There was a law, for example, by Diocletian in the 280s that said that you can't carry a certain amount of weight on a cart. I don't think anyone ever really listened to that. That's probably one of the reasons Diocletian hanged himself later on in his career after he retired. But this is interesting because we don't know how it's getting there, not necessarily. I think by river, I think river transport is probably the best bet. But we are able to start to get an idea of where our material is going. So we've done rather a lot of work. So there's our site at Prize Hall. We've done rather a lot of work on distribution on the tiles itself. And it's becoming quite clear that it is a regional centre of production, and it is probably producing for all of for most of rather the contemporary villas and the towns, and maybe many other reasons as well, many other site types within the local area, and perhaps even further. And what this does as well, it's not just to think about the economy. We also then start to see the social ties that this kind of economy gives us. Because, for example, the Prize Hall Tilery, remember, it is privately owned by a wealthy villa estate owner. So therefore, that they would have had friends with wealthy villa estates. So they have this social contract. So in studying tiles and pottery and bits and pieces of material like that, we can start to get some at least appreciation, or rather contextualization, of the social landscape that was also linked with this as well. So the thing is about this, we're going to see this. So Ashton, for example, is a Roman town. Manchester, Jura Vigutum, just up the road from where I live, actually, is an incredibly important Roman settlement just off the Ermine Street, originally a mancio and a fort and all sorts of stuff. You've got the enormous Nene Valley potteries just up at Jura Brevi, but we found comparatively quite a few less sherds of Nene Valley ware on Prize Hall than we would expect, probably because they're making all their own. And then we have the villas at Stanwick, Higham Ferrers, and we know, of course, Little Weldon. Not surprising, it's 2 kilometres away. It would be very strange if none of the tiles found their way to Little Weldon. So we have this basically new fabric series that we're able to now start to publish, and then other people, when they find tile, they have a fabric series that they're able to compare. The issue is it's a very generic type of fabric. For example, you get the Harold kilns, which are in Bedfordshire, and they are very distinctive. They're one of the big regional centres. They were supplying London all the way into the 5th century. But the Harold kilns in Bedfordshire were enormous, and they were very busy. Prize Hall is at least on the same scale as that, as we're beginning to understand now. And it's also the same kind of date, because we found not a single piece of Harold fabric anywhere on Prize Hall. But that's incredibly shelly. So you break open a part of a tile, and it's incredibly distinctive, is that basically lots of little white shell all through the fabric. So the thing is about our kilns is they weren't the only things on the site. We spent an inordinate amount of time. You can see the original as we stripped it. This is after the first site strip. The villa is here to the top of your picture, just here, and the villa is literally just there. So it's about 200 meters away. So that wasn't the only things we found on a very small site. There was a lot compacted in. I've included this for everybody. This is a haulage track that we found that goes into the stone quarry. This is the metalworking area that I told you about, where they recycled things. This area here, you can see this clay shelf with these enormous pits in it. They are clay quarries. We thought originally, obviously, because of course we did, we thought originally that these clay quarries were supplying the tilery just over here. They were the clay used. But we did chemical analysis on the clay and compared it to the tiles, and it's not the clay being used in tilery production, in the production of tiles. We think it might be a different type of clay a bit further up, and we're just going to take some samples of that and find out. And we also found 3 pottery kilns, which I'll get to, and this enormous stone quarry, and obviously the early Roman track or roadway that we found that goes past Little Weldon Villa as well, and of which, of course, the original mausoleum was built alongside. Now, I don't know if the eagle-eyed you have probably seen this. By the late Roman period, you can see there's a Roman ditch that cuts across this. By the late Roman period, this track is absolutely not in use anymore. They are not using this anymore during the tile kiln's life. So they must be bringing the tiles out here This is where I think the officina, or the large part of the workshop, would have been, because the water course is also here as well. So they've got a good supply of water, because they'd have need plenty of place to store the tiles and dry them. So this is where we think they were putting the tiles out and walking along them and doing all their bits. Sadly, though, it had been truncated by a modern farm, and that's why we didn't excavate it. So it kind of gives you a really good sense that what a lucky survival it was. So one of the really cool things was this. This is from the stone quarry. This is some of the stone that they didn't need for the villa next door, so they just threw it back in the hole. This is stone that they'd quarried and then threw back in one of the holes. This is a really interesting thing. You don't really see this too often. And then this is just one of the incredibly well-built pottery kilns cut into the side of the stone quarry. So you can see it as it goes round. It's actually cut into the side of the stone quarry around here like this. And you can see it's using the old, because we know what the roof material was made from the mausoleum itself. We know that it was early form of Collie Western slate, because we found hundreds of kilos on it on the mausoleum site itself that they'd reused. But nowhere else on the villa site at all did we find any Collie Western slate. So it must have been the mausoleum's roof. And they were using it around area A, the rest of it, as column bases, basically a post base, to build little structures over the kilns themselves, these little pottery kilns, which would have been turfed like this. And just to give you an idea of size of these things, this is Anna, the archaeologist that dug this one. This is in the side of the pottery kiln, the stone quarry just here. This is Anna sat inside, and you can see again, it's using a composite of Collie Western slate tile from the original roof, and then stone from the mausoleum or building itself, and then tile as well. But they're incredibly well built, they're incredibly well made, and they were kicking out jars and plates and a lot of lids. They were making a lot of lids at Prize Hall, and distribution of that product is ongoing. And I'm sure, as many of you can appreciate, that is a huge task to undertake. And then we come to probably one of the most famous things we found at Prize Hall, which was this. This was located just at the bottom of the stone quarry. If I show you just here, just immediately to the east of the original tile kiln, just here, just on the bottom of the ridge, this was cut in. And I'll tell you the story of this actually. The only thing, so we spent, the team, which was not very big, we spent almost the entire excavation project, about 5.5 months, just on the tileries itself, which I'm sure you could appreciate, I'm sure you can understand. We spent a lot of time on it, and then I started to realize that we perhaps needed to move into the rest of the site. And there were only these 3 stones poking out on the side. And I remember saying to one of the archaeologists, could you do me a favor and just go over there and clean those up and just see if it's anything? Because there is a very, very well polished saying amongst archaeologists in that 3 stones make a wall. And I said, it's probably nothing. It's probably nothing. Just go and have a look. And she cleaned it up, and this is what it looked like after she cleaned it. And as you can probably tell, it was definitely something. And it turns out that upon excavation, it was a lime kiln, one of the biggest lime kilns discovered from Roman Britain for many, many years. It is enormous. It's an absolutely enormous thing. It's about 3 meters by 3 meters in diameter on the interior side. You can see, in fact, the edge of the stone quarry as it comes up near where James is digging just here. This is the edge of the stone quarry. So you can see it's been cut into the edge facing the villa. And what this is for is basically to melt limestone to create lime mortar for the construction project just next door. And this was carbon dated as well to around 258 to around 358. But what's really interesting as well is that the lime kiln was one of the very last things used on Prize Hall, because there was some evidence to suggest with the carbon dates that it went into the 5th century. So there's some suggestion that the villa next door survived into the 5th century, and they were at least making some effort to do some repairs with mortar. Now, what's interesting again about this is what you remember from the tile manufacturing zone. First of all, a section just here, that is the rake out of debris that they did. So they would rake it out from here, and you can see it trapped in the section just here. And again, this was a pillar, and it was enormous. It took 4 of us to carry it, to pick it up. This was a pillar that held up the original entrance. So above it, you'd have had a huge turf mound, basically, like a roof, so they'd melt the stone inside it. And this here, the stone, at some point in its life, very akin to the tilery, it had fallen over. And they continue to use it, because I'm not surprised that they continue to use it and they didn't try and pick that up, because that was horrendous to pick up, because it was incredibly heavy. So it was so big that it managed to fit my entire site team inside it. In fact, we used to have our lunch breaks inside the lime kiln. And you can see the stone quarry as it goes down into it, next to it. And you can even see still stratigraphically there is the original burning material and the rake out and the fire clay that impacted this stuff as well. We think that it made between 3.5 to 4 tons of lime mortar per go, per fire. And it was fired at least 3 times, but it's almost certainly maybe more. It's at least 3. So that is, as well, this is a really nice opportunity to introduce you the site team that dug all of Prize Hall. In fact, the other side as well with the road. This is the size of the site team that dug everything that I've showed you this evening. So I get the wonderful, I suppose the wonderful privilege of being able to speak to you about this, even though it's over Zoom. I don't get to meet any of you, but even though it's over Zoom, I get the wonderful privilege to speak to you about this wonderful site and these wonderful remains that we found and what it means. But I am firmly stood on their shoulders. They worked incredibly hard. They digged the whole site in 6 months, and this entire lime kiln was dug by one archaeologist, Kelly here, and she did it incredibly quickly, and she did it to a wonderful, wonderful standard as well. And I just think this is something that's missing from what we do. We tend to not introduce the archaeologists themselves, and they were an absolutely fabulous team of archaeologists. So we're going to end on this, actually, because I know that many of you are probably relieved that I've not gone on for 3 hours. But I would just like to caveat that for every one thing I've told you about, there is 150 contributing evidence strains or threads in that blanket, if you like, that lead towards these kind of conclusions. For every one thing I've shown you, there's hundreds of things that I've been forced to miss out. Some wonderful bits of work, bone, for example, where they might have been doing it on the site, or rather, I don't really know enough about work bone and the industry and everything. However, there's lots of things, but I just wanted to show you this. This is as you can probably tell, it's 2 dolphins. And this shows you the fluidity of archaeology in this country, because this is an object that has been through many revisionist interpretations. So the very first thing was it was a buckle, and then it became a Romano, an army helmet handle, which was then poo-pooed. And eventually now it's been settled on that it's a box handle for a very ornate box, because some fittings were found next to it that suggest that it was a very ornate box. And what's wonderful about this is it is classically late Roman, but in fact it's so late Roman that it almost moves into the 5th century as well. And I think it's just a wonderful thing, because it's 2 dolphins rising up and kissing in the middle, and that's where your hand would go, just in there, and your hand would fit in pretty well in there. So I will end it there, because I've managed to do this in just over an hour, so I'm incredibly pleased with myself. I just want to say thank you ever so much for inviting me to speak to you again, and hopefully you've enjoyed the journey, I suppose, as much as we enjoyed digging it. And it's really lovely to be able to share the hard work of this wonderful team, but also the hard work of the Romano British that worked there, because they were completely unknown until we found them. So we are, in every single excavation we do, we are constantly pushing the envelope of the narrative and showing just how complex and interesting and special the Roman period actually was. And I think what Prize Hall does more than anything else is we shouldn't think of Britain as Roman Britain, like we are taught at school and like we often do now. We still talk about it as Roman Britain. Instead, we should perhaps think of it as Britain in the Roman Empire. because I think that follows something that David Mattingly, for example, proposes, that we should think of this as that. And we should question everything we find as well. So thank you very much. If you'd like to know any more about the site, we did several current archaeology articles and bits and pieces. And of course, I have to include, yes, of course, it won the current, oh, that's incredibly soft boast, this. It's the Current Archaeology Award for Rescue Project of the Year, 2022. So that was thanks to the wonderful team that dug it. So thank you ever so much. And I'll end just on one more. I'll just show you the road one more time that we found on the other side, because I noticed that slide was there. Ever so much for listening. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Paddy. In the course of the last hour, while you've been talking, my voice has been gradually getting worse and worse, and I've said not a word. Are you still there?
Yes, I am indeed. Yes. Yeah.
Right. It looked like your video had frozen then for a second.
No, I think I've frozen. That's it.
Ah.
I think I'm just trying to make everybody incredibly worried that I've gone.
You've only overrun by about 5 minutes. For you, that's a miracle.
Thank you so much. I don't quite know how to take that, but that is a lovely thing for you to say.
You're one of the most enthusiastic people I know. So there we go.
Thank you.
Right, we do have a couple of questions and a comment. A lot of plaudits for the great white screen. That went down very well.
Well, so much. It was just very, very snowing that day, I think, and I just wanted to show you.
Serious question. Is there a river or a stream adjacent to the villa and the tilery?
Yes.
That's from John Barry.
It's now called the Willow Brook, and it was canalized in the 80s. But yes, it was a very large water course right next door, within about 150 meters.
We have from Chris Gibson. This actually refers back to your previous talk where you showed a slide with post holes on the road with a river crossing ahead of it. He asks, what are your views on the purpose of the post holes, and could traffic management of the river crossing be related to the reason? Paddy, we've lost you. Can you turn to the microphone? We couldn't hear you then when you turn right.
Sorry, Chris, I remember this. I remember you emailed me about this a few times. Yes, I've been meaning to email you back. What do I think the purpose of them are? I think, as I think we agreed before, I think it's never one single thing. I think it's for many things. I think traffic management, I think, is the most likely at the moment. And that's all I really have at the moment. I think it's very similar to what you were thinking as well. I think that's probably what it is. I think, but 3 posts across the road, I don't think we can make too much of it just at the moment. I think we'd need to find more.
Yeah, I can't add anything to that, I'm afraid. From Paul Smith. Paddy said we might be relieved he hadn't talked for 3 hours. I could listen to him all night.
Oh wow! Thank you so much. We should.
And from Angela B. From Angela B, 3 hours would be just fine. So interesting. That's from California.
Wow! Thank you very much.
Yeah, we get audience from all over the world. I don't think we've got anyone from Australia tonight. We often do. I've got some more coming, I think. Just bear with me one sec. We may have to do this a different way. I'm not getting an email through. If you've got any questions, Dave, can you send them through? Otherwise, I'll just go straight to the chat and do it that way. Lots of people thank you for the talk. Here we go. From Paul Wood. Are the parallels with Switzerland indicating perhaps movement of personnel, or is it a coincidence?
That is the best question I think I've ever been asked, because that was what I was kind of hoping people would start to maybe question, I think, or think about. I don't know. There is no way of proving it, that they could be the same personnel, like itinerant craftspeople hiring themselves out across the temperate European theatre, if you like, of the Roman provinces of the northern provinces. However, I think on this occasion, I think we'll call it a very eerie coincidence until we can find a way of comparatively analysing the two data sets, I think.
Yeah, I think it is interesting. And is it a coincidence that we were talking about this the other night?
It's
The
exactly what I
actual
was
way
thinking, yeah.
people won't be aware of this, that the actual road construction is not normal for this country. It's a little different. And the parallels are, well, the ones that I'm aware of, Northern Italy and in Spain. The implication being that a workforce was brought in from the continent to build the road,
Yep.
as well as the tilery, perhaps. That could say something about the people who live there.
I think exactly the same as you, Mike, and thank you, Paul. I think that is, I think it's much less appreciated within the public sphere. I think we've taken it for granted within Romano British archaeological studies itself that this is very common. That you do get itinerant crafts people going all the way, and peripatetic as well. They're doing many things at once from all around the Roman Empire coming in, because remember, the Romans made the world much smaller, and they could, we've got evidence of Romano British people serving in the military in Hungary and in Switzerland, places like that. So I do think so, and I think that's why what you said to me yesterday, Mike, which follows what Paul says, or Paul asks, what you said to me yesterday about the Spanish kind of the link between the idea of the road being slightly idiosyncratic, because that's what Prize Hall is. That's its fundamental identifier, is idiosyncrasy. It doesn't fit a lot of the typologies that we understand, just as the tileries themselves. They all seem to be slightly weird and slightly strange. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's something I'm definitely going to be looking at a lot more. It's something we're exploring. I'm speaking with Catherine de Wick, the archaeologist from Switzerland that's building it, that's doing it at the moment, and we're both incredibly excited about this avenue to explore.
Well, I look forward to
So I'm so pleased you asked that, Paul. Thank you.
And another excellent question from Jan Scott, because this is really about how modern local communities relate to archaeology, and she asks a simple question: do the people in the houses around realize there is such a site so nearby?
Yes. So the one question I've noticed that hasn't been asked, and it might be because I negotiated this before, is where is it now? What happened to the site? Because you can see it was quite a stupendous thing, and I'm afraid the answer is it was developed. It was destroyed and developed, and it was turned into, it's underneath housing. Yes, they are aware. They're incredibly aware, because the client, Urban and Civic, the master developer, were actively engaged with what we did, and they were incredibly interested. So what they're doing at the moment is they're naming a lot of the streets and the some of the houses after the site and what we found. For example, I think there's a Potentinus Avenue or something else like that, and I think there's Tilery Way or Paddy Street, maybe, hoping. So it's the Via Paddy or something else like that. So yeah, they are aware, but I don't think as much as, because it was a while ago, and nothing fades quicker than memory, I think. But we do know that the people are aware, and they're very excited about some of it, I think. In fact, a small archaeological group has started, and they're called the Prize Hall Research Association or something like that. Because I am hoping, as I mentioned to you before, and I mentioned to this wonderful group before, that we are applying for scheduled monument consent. Yeah, thank you, Alan. Yeah, Paddy Street, subtle. I was going to call it Paddy Way, because we did it my way. But I do think we are trying to apply for scheduled monument consent, because the site is so strange and so idiosyncratic. We need to put a hole in the villa, I think. We need to understand the villa buildings a little bit better. So we need to put some hole. Yeah. But that will engage the inhabitants living there much, much more.
Whether you'll succeed in persuading Historic England to let you is another thing altogether. And let's not go into the whole
really nicely.
From Jan Scott again, and she's asking whether local schools are using the site when studying the Roman period. I hope so, she adds.
Yes, I actually, every year I go to the Corby Academy, which is situated right next to the site. which is a secondary school. They're not like any secondary schools I remember. These have security gates and all sorts. It's incredible place. It's like a military base. But I go in every year at Christmas and tell them about what we found at the site. And I take a lot of the tiles with me. I've donated a lot of the tiles with animal prints and everything else to them, and I engage with them as much as possible. And it does. But there's only so much you can do without actively being interested in it first, I think.
From John Watson. Are there any hints as to what caused the change in population? I think he's presumably referring to the villa diminishing and then starting again.
Yeah, I think yes, clues wise, no, and it would be incredibly difficult to find because it's probably rooted in socioeconomics or sociocultural aspects of it. But I think what we can say is the effect. We don't necessarily know the cause, but we can see the effects, and I suppose we could say it. I think the 3rd century re-inhabitation of the villa landscape arises from the political landscape at the time, from the late Roman period, from the Carausian revolt onwards, from around 286 when Carausius revolted. The Romans again strangled it, and I think that's where that comes from. But the difficult one is the early villa, the 70 to 151, because early villas are actually quite rare. They're not rare as in like really special, but rare as in relatively uncommon. Early villas. Most villas that you see within the Romano British landscape arrive from the 4th century. They're the big palatial things with lovely mosaics and everything else. Most of the early Roman villas follow the Italian versions of them, which is quite smaller, or rather the Northern European ones. And I think, and I touched this on before, I think the population in the beginning may have been retired veterans. Or a party of retired veterans, or a retired veteran and his family, or a magistrate that had moved there, or a tax collector, or a merchant, or somebody with a lot of money. Because to build the smoking gun here is the mausoleum. It is so rare and so different to find something like that this person had intricate knowledge, or rather huge knowledge, of what was going on in Gaul or France at exactly the same time. Because there's very similar examples of our mausolea in Belgium, and they're called the Belgic types, and you find them around Kent a lot. And we know that that's probably where that arrives. And I think it actually is quite common. The population changes. I think it surges. It goes up and down all the time. I think we have an erroneous view in archaeology of these huge spans of time, whereas in fact what we're really looking at is generations, people lifetimes. We don't really think of it in terms of lifetime. We think of it in terms of 2nd, 3rd century. That's 200 years. That's a lot of time. So it's difficult to pick it all apart, but I suspect it's something like that.
Yeah. From Delwyn Matthews, who apologises if he missed it. Well, I don't think he did, Delwyn. Do we have any idea of how many people might have been needed to work at the site, given its scale and regional importance?
Oh, that's again a wonderful question. It's one of those things I couldn't touch on, but it's something that's been forming the focus of the publication work at the moment in my research. I think only about 6 tilers were working there, 6 to 8 tilers, because they could do 200 a day each. We know that from a tile kiln in Siskia, where they have a lot of that epigraphic how many I made a day, and there were only ever around 6 to 8 tilers working on the tile kiln at any one. So I think 6 to 8, and I think they're also the same people making the pottery, and so with associated perhaps slaves or other tradesmen doing all the quarrying and everything else, and perhaps even they were traveling around. They might have been working there a couple of months and then going to another site somewhere else to make pottery, coming back. They were peripatetic as well as itinerant, I think. But yeah, we do know how many people would have been there. Probably 6 to 8, 6 to 10, maybe.
Yeah,
with many more hangers on.
Next question is from Mike Luke, and I suspect this is a professional interest. And he's asking about the actual the tiles themselves. I better make a bit of an explanation here to people who might not know. A Roman roof consisted primarily of 2 different tiles. You had essentially what was a tray with sides, and you saw those being laid out in the example that you showed us from Spain,
And the tegula,
Catalonia. And to link them together, you had what was effectively half a cylinder that fitted over the two upstanding bits. So if you can imagine like that, you have that over the top, and that's called an imbrex. And Mike is asking, did you find an imbrex at the site? I think I know what the answer is.
Were they manufacturing imbrex? Yes.
Yes, you did.
Yes,
right.
Because you need both. To make a roof, you need both, and they were manufacturing imbrex on a smaller scale because they're more difficult to see in the grand scale of what we think. Tegular are big and they survive pretty well. Imbrex are thick and they kind of survive okay sometimes, but we do think absolutely they were creating imbrex. We were finding a lot of, so yeah.
Certainly in excavation, you do tend to find plenty of tegulae and very few imbrices.
That's actually now then. Paul Booth taught me that many years ago. I'm sorry about that. So many years ago, Paul Booth told me about that. He said you can only say if there's a Roman building nearby if you find equal numbers of tegula and imbrex on a site.
Really?
And I've always used that as a rule of thumb because he's an incredible Romanist. He's wonderful, as you know. And he always said that to me. He said that to me. And that was many years ago, and that I've always stuck with me because we do find a lot of tegula on sites, bits like the flanges, a lot of them, or bits and pieces. And I think most of the time on rural sites, bits of tegula were used in manuring. They were used to break up heavy soils in order to help plough it again, and they were used for a multitude of different things. Not for roofing. Tegula don't mean roof all the time. They had, like I was talking about, the recycling industry that have been used for hundreds of other things because they're just a good material. We know, for example, they were using them on the surface of the avenue as well. So there have been many different ways. But yeah, imbrex, and you're absolutely right. You need to find imbrex and tegula pretty much equal quantities.
And that, I think, is it. There's any more, Dave? Can you send them through?
There's no more that I've detected, Mike.
Okay.
Oh, excellent.
I did like to see the animal prints on the tegula that he showed. Although if it's in a box upstairs, I'm not going to go and get it. But we have one with the biggest dog's footprint I've ever seen in my life. This must have been a deerhound-sized thing, or even bigger. Absolutely enormous, which we dug up a few years ago. They're surprisingly common. It must have been a big.
They really are. Yeah, we found hundreds of them, and hundreds of them. Yeah, you see them everywhere. But there is something special about finding it for the first time and being able to put your fingers. I know even after all these years of doing this and finding some really wonderful things, there's still something primeval about doing that. There's still something incredible. In fact, one second, I know you don't like the tile I showed you. I hope you can see this.
Oh yeah.
It's actually the one I was able to keep this. This is actually the cat print tile that I'm holding just here. And on the other side, it's still got all the original prize hall dirt on it. I don't want to wash it off. I think it's part of the patina. So this is one of and what you don't get a chance to see is the tilers themselves. That's the tiler's finger mark there as they've picked up the tile like this to get it out of the drying rack. They've actually smudged it, and what they've tried to do, which I really love, is they've tried to put it back again.
Wipe it off. Yeah.
And to do that, it's incredibly tangible. It's like but I still think, and I would still say, when people ask what's the best thing you've ever found, the road beat the building by a long way.
Good man.
It really did.
You're only saying that to make me happy.
No, I'm really not. I think the road I was delighted with. That was honestly, you saw the effects of that, but digging that in winter was hell on earth.
Oh, it was an excellent example. Excuse me. Got away with it so far. Right.
I've got to say as well, sorry, I've just got to interrupt. Sorry. I'm seeing these comments that you are all so kind. That I'm getting you're all saying some really wonderful things. Thank you all so much. I think you're being far too kind. Thank you.
No, it's justified, Paddy. You do a fantastic job at work and talking to us here, telling us all about it. And your enthusiasm rubs off on people. I think you saw it on the expressions of your team. They might not be smiling when you weren't watching them, but I don't know. Who knows?
That's the thing that worries me. I think they're just hugely intimidated all the time.
I doubt that. Right. With that, as you can hear, my voice is starting to fail, so I think we're going to have to wind it up. So it only remains to thank Dave, who was our only member of the team apart from me tonight. We're a short staff, but we have a good audience. It peaked at 194.
Wow. Okay. Wow, that's wonderful.
Yeah, which is excellent. And to be honest, that's actually the highest percentage of bookings of people have turned up. So that says something for you. Normally we get about 2/3. That was almost.
I think that's
8%.
largely you, Mike, in your snazzy
Oh,
shirt,
get off.
to be perfectly honest.
All right, so I'm going to wish everybody a good night.